There's a moment in every deep healing journey when everything you thought you knew about yourself, about reality, about God, about life itself completely falls apart. When you wake up one morning and you don't recognize the person staring back at you in the mirror. When the spiritual practices that once brought you peace now feel empty and meaningless. When you question whether you're losing your mind or finally finding it. This isn't a breakdown. This is what mystics have called the dark night of the soul. And it's the most sacred passage you'll ever walk through. I'm about to share something with you that will challenge everything you've been told about mental health, about spiritual awakening, about what it means to be human. What I'm going to tell you might save your life, or it might save someone you love who's walking through this valley of shadows right now, feeling completely alone and terrified that they're going insane. 3 years ago, I was lying in my bed in Edinburgh, sweating through my sheets, my heart pounding so hot I thought it would burst through my chest. But this wasn't just anxiety. This was something far more profound. My entire sense of self was dissolving. The person I had been for 30 years was dying, and I had no idea who was being born in his place. I was in the middle of what psychiatrists would call a psychotic break. But what I now understand was a spiritual emergency, the most terrifying and transformative experience of my life. If you've ever felt like you're losing your grip on reality, if you've ever questioned whether you're going crazy or awakening, if you've ever felt abandoned by God just when you needed divine connection the most, then you need to hear this. Hit that subscribe button right now, like this video, and tell me in the comments, have you ever felt like your entire world was crumbling around you just when you thought you were making spiritual progress? Because what I'm about to share with you will change how you understand these experiences forever. Let me tell you what really happened during those months in 2022 when I thought I was losing my mind. I had been doing deep inner work, meditating, working with frequencies, communicating with spiritual guides, and I felt like I was making incredible progress. Then suddenly, it was like someone pulled the rug out from under my entire existence. I couldn't feel God anymore. I couldn't feel my guides. The spiritual practices that had been my lifeline felt empty and meaningless. I was consumed by existential terror. Who was I, if I wasn't the person I thought I was? What was the point of anything if everything I believed was an illusion? Here's what no one tells you about the spiritual journey. The closer you get to truth, the more everything false has to die. And that death process is excruciating. Your ego, your identity, your beliefs, your sense of safety in the world, they all have to be stripped away so that your authentic self can emerge. But in the middle of that stripping away, you feel like you're dying, because you are dying. The person you used to be is literally dying, so that the person you're meant to become can be born. The dark night of the soul isn't a spiritual concept, it's a spiritual emergency. It's what happens when your consciousness expands so rapidly that your psychological structures can't keep up. It's what happens when you pierce the veil between dimensions and your ordinary mind can't process what you're experiencing. It's what happens when you start to remember who you really are, and your ego fights back with everything it has because it knows its days are numbered. But here's what the mainstream mental health system doesn't understand. There's a profound difference between a spiritual emergency and mental illness. In a spiritual emergency, you're not losing your mind, you're losing your illusions. You're not becoming psychotic, you're becoming psychic. You're not having a breakdown, you're having a breakthrough that's so intense it feels like you're breaking apart. The key difference is this: in mental illness, consciousness contracts and becomes more rigid. In spiritual emergency, consciousness expands and becomes more fluid. In mental illness, you lose connection to meaning and purpose. In spiritual emergency, you're overwhelmed by too much meaning, too much connection, too much awareness of the interconnectedness of all things. In mental illness, you become disconnected from your body and your emotions. In spiritual emergency, you become hyperconnected to everything: your body, your emotions, other people's emotions, the collective unconscious, the pain of the world. During my dark night, I was experiencing what mystics throughout history have described. I was feeling the collective sorrow of humanity. I was sensing energies and entities that I couldn't explain. I was having visions and receiving downloads of information that my rational mind couldn't process. I was experiencing what felt like ego death, the complete dissolution of my sense of self. And the most terrifying part was that I couldn't control it. I couldn't turn it off. I couldn't go back to being the person I was before. This is what Stanislav Grof calls a spiritual emergency, when spiritual emergence becomes so intense and overwhelming that it creates a crisis in your ability to function in ordinary reality. Your consciousness is expanding faster than your psychological structures can integrate. You're downloading more information than your nervous system can process. You're experiencing dimensions of reality that your mind was never taught to navigate. Here's what I wish someone had told me during those months of terror. You're not going crazy. You're going sane in an insane world. You're not losing yourself. You're finding yourself. You're not being abandoned by the divine. You're being initiated by the divine. This is how consciousness evolves. This is how souls are forged. This is how ordinary humans become extraordinary beings. But here's the crucial part that most spiritual teachers won't tell you. You can't think your way through a spiritual emergency. You can't meditate your way out of it. You can't positive think your way past it. You have to surrender to it. You have to let it take you apart completely so that you can be put back together in a new configuration. You have to trust the process, even when the process feels like it's destroying you. During my darkest moments, when I felt like I was drowning in cosmic consciousness, when I couldn't tell where I ended and the universe began, when I was so overwhelmed by the intensity of existence that I wanted to crawl out of my own skin, I had to learn to surrender. Not the passive surrender of giving up, but the active surrender of letting go. Letting go of who I thought I was. Letting go of how I thought reality worked. Letting go of my need to control the experience, and instead learning to ride the wave of transformation. This is where most people get stuck. They resist the dissolution. They fight against the ego death. They try to maintain their old identity, while simultaneously trying to evolve into something new. But you can't do both. You can't hold onto the caterpillar while becoming the butterfly. You have to let the caterpillar die completely so that the butterfly can emerge. The spiritual emergency has stages, and understanding these stages can help you navigate the process instead of being destroyed by it. The first stage is the initial crack in your reality. Something happens that shatters your worldview. Maybe it's a spiritual experience. Maybe it's a trauma. Maybe it's a psychedelic journey. Maybe it's just the accumulated pressure of living inauthentically for too long. Whatever it is, it creates a fissure in your consciousness that can't be sealed back up. The second stage is the flood. All the suppressed emotions, all the repressed memories, all the disowned parts of yourself come rushing through that crack like water through a broken dam. This is when you feel like you're drowning in your own psyche. This is when you experience what feels like madness, but is actually the return of your wholeness. The third stage is the dissolution. Your ego structures start to break down. Your sense of self becomes fluid. Your boundaries between self and others start to dissolve. You might experience depersonalization, derealization, or what feels like complete ego death. This is the most terrifying stage because it feels like you're dying, and in a very real sense you are. The fourth stage is the void. You've died to your old self, but haven't yet been reborn into your new self. You exist in a liminal space between worlds. Nothing makes sense. Nothing has meaning. You feel empty, lost, abandoned by everything you once believed in. This is the true dark night of the soul, the space between death and rebirth. The fifth stage is the emergence. Slowly, gradually, a new sense of self begins to form. But this isn't a return to who you were before. This is the birth of who you were always meant to be. You emerge from the darkness with expanded consciousness, deeper compassion, and a direct knowing of your true nature that can never be taken away from you. But here's what's crucial to understand. You can't rush this process. You can't skip stages. You can't think your way through it or meditate your way around it. You have to live through it. You have to feel through it. You have to surrender to it completely and trust that there's intelligence in the process, even when it feels like chaos. During my emergence phase, I started to understand that everything I had experienced, the terror, the dissolution, the void, the rebirth, was necessary. My old self had to die because it was built on lies. It was built on programming from my narcissistic family system. It was built on trauma responses and survival mechanisms that were keeping me small and disconnected from my true power. The spiritual emergency burned away everything that wasn't authentically me. It stripped away the people-pleasing, the fear-based decisions, the need for external validation, the unconscious patterns that had been running my life. It was like a spiritual chemotherapy. It was killing the cancer of false identity so that my true self could emerge. But here's what I need you to understand. If you're going through this right now, you need support. You need people who understand what you're experiencing. You need guides who have walked this path before you. The mainstream mental health system is not equipped to handle spiritual emergencies. They'll try to medicate you back to your old level of consciousness. They'll pathologize your awakening. They'll try to convince you that your expanded awareness is a symptom of illness rather than a sign of evolution. If you're in a spiritual emergency right now, here's what you need to do. First, find your tribe. Find people who understand that consciousness can expand beyond the ordinary boundaries of ego. Find therapists who are trained in transpersonal psychology. Find spiritual teachers who have navigated their own dark nights. Find communities of people who are walking the path of awakening. Second, ground yourself in your body. Spiritual emergencies can make you feel like you're floating in space with no anchor to physical reality. You need to reconnect with your body, with the earth, with the present moment. Walk barefoot on grass. Take baths. Move your body. Breathe consciously. Eat nourishing food. Sleep when you can. Your body is your anchor during the storm of consciousness expansion. Third, create structure and routine. When your inner world is chaos, you need external stability. Create simple daily routines that give you something to hold on to. Morning rituals, evening rituals, regular meal times, consistent sleep schedules. These become your lifelines when everything else feels uncertain. Fourth, limit your spiritual practices. This might sound counterintuitive, but during a spiritual emergency, more spiritual input is not what you need. You're already overwhelmed by spiritual energy. You need integration, not more expansion. Put down the meditation cushion. Stop doing breath work. Avoid psychedelics. Focus on grounding and integration instead of further opening. Fifth, trust the process. This is the hardest part, but it's the most important. Trust that there's intelligence in what you're experiencing. Trust that your psyche knows how to heal itself. Trust that you're not going crazy, you're going sane. Trust that this dark night will give way to a new dawn. Trust that you're being initiated into a deeper level of consciousness, and that this initiation, while painful, is sacred. The spiritual emergency isn't a detour from your path, it is your path. It's not something to be cured or fixed or medicated away. It's something to be honored, supported, and navigated with wisdom and courage. It's the cocoon phase of your transformation. It's the death that precedes rebirth. It's the darkness that makes the light possible. I want you to understand something profound. Every great spiritual teacher, every mystic, every awakened being throughout history has walked through their own version of the dark night of the soul. Jesus had his 40 days in the desert. Buddha had his encounter with Mara under the Bodhi tree. The shamans of every culture have their initiatory ordeals. This is not pathology. This is the natural process of consciousness evolution. You are not broken. You are not sick. You are not going crazy. You are going through the most sacred passage that a human being can experience. You are being initiated into the mysteries of existence. You are being prepared for a level of service and consciousness that requires you to be completely remade from the inside out. The person you were before the spiritual emergency was not equipped to handle the level of truth, power, and responsibility that comes with awakened consciousness. That person had to die, so that the awakened you could be born, and that awakened you, the you that emerges from the dark night of the soul, that version of you, is going to change the world. Your spiritual emergency isn't just about your personal healing. It's about your preparation to be a healer for others. It's about your initiation into the role of wounded healer, the one who can guide others through the darkness because you've walked through it yourself. It's about your preparation to be a bridge between worlds, someone who can translate the language of expanded consciousness for those who are still trapped in ordinary awareness. This is why the spiritual emergency is so intense, so overwhelming, so transformative, because you're not just healing yourself, you're being prepared to heal others. You're not just awakening for your own benefit, you're awakening so that you can help awaken humanity. You're not just going through a personal crisis, you're going through a spiritual initiation that will prepare you for your sacred work in the world. So, if you're in the middle of your dark night of the soul right now, if you're feeling lost and broken and terrified, I want you to know that you're exactly where you need to be. I want you to know that this darkness is not permanent. I want you to know that you're being held by forces greater than you can imagine, even when it feels like you've been abandoned by everything you once believed in. Your spiritual emergency is not a mistake. It's not a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's not evidence that you're weak or broken or crazy. It's evidence that you're strong enough to handle the intensity of consciousness expansion. It's evidence that your soul is ready for the next level of its evolution. It's evidence that you're being called to something greater than the ordinary human experience. The dark night of the soul is not the end of your story. It's the beginning of your real story. It's not the destruction of who you are. It's the revelation of who you've always been. It's not the death of your dreams. It's the birth of your destiny. And when you emerge from this darkness, when you step into the light of your new consciousness, when you integrate all the wisdom and power and compassion that this experience has given you, you're going to understand that every moment of terror was worth it. Every moment of dissolution was necessary. Every moment of feeling lost was actually you finding your way home to your true self. The spiritual emergency is the price of admission to authentic spiritual power. It's the initiation that separates the spiritual tourists from the spiritual warriors. It's the crucible that transforms ordinary humans into extraordinary beings. And you, my friend, are being forged in that crucible right now. Trust the process, surrender to the journey, and know that on the other side of this darkness, a version of you is waiting that is more powerful, more compassionate, more authentic, and more alive than you ever imagined possible. Your dark night of the soul is not your ending, it's your beginning.